What is up, everybody? Welcome back to XJW Diaries. My name is Justin. It's been a little bit. I had some scheduling changes. I got sick for a little bit. Had to take some time for myself for the holidays. So if you have contacted me for an interview, don't worry. I have not forgotten about you. But welcome to 2025. Happy New Year to all of you. I wanted to start this year off with a video that's really for you guys. You know, I've seen in the comments section, I've seen in direct emails, people saying that they have their spouse, their kids, their grandkids, list goes on, people that are stuck in this organization. And they'll say that these people are really, really deep in, starting to lose hope. They're wondering, can these people ever wake up from this organization? And so I wanted to get into my own story a little bit with this one. It's been a while since I talked about my own story. I never really talked about it in too deep of a way as I'm going to in this video. Because one of the big aspects of my story is that throughout the majority of it, right up to the very end, I was not looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was very deep in and continuing to progress. So this just shows how when you have a certain blend of ingredients, sometimes it can just take one small thing to finally cause you to open up your eyes and see where you really are. So, you know, hopefully this gives you guys some hope. Hopefully this is helpful. And it can be easy to lose hope. It really can. But hopefully this shows that anybody truly can wake up. No matter how deep they are in it, they can wake up. So let's start this thing off with just full transparency. In my younger teenage years, I was not a very good Jehovah's Witness. I wasn't necessarily looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I also wasn't progressing. Things changed when I turned 18. Shortly after turning 18, I got my first car. And growing up as a 90s kid with Fast and the Furious, Need for Speed Underground, I got myself a Mitsubishi Eclipse, third generation. Not nearly as fast as it looks, but plenty fast enough to get myself into some trouble. And that car is actually a key part in my story in a couple of ways. The first way is that it shows what kind of witness I was. I was a practical witness. Those years of rebellion kind of made me into a more practical witness. I knew that there were certain things that really mattered, and there were certain things that honestly did not matter. And so in the case of a car, you know, your average witness, you got to be driving a service car, four-door car. For me, again, I was a practical witness. I am a single guy, 18 years old, no kids. I was not a pioneer at that time. Why do I need a service car? I'm paying for the car. I'm going to go get myself something fun. And so that was my mindset. You know, and there was definitely people in the congregation that gave me a little side eye, but you know what? They weren't paying for it. Now, another aspect to that car. Before getting that car, my family was pretty regular to meetings, but my mom was starting to lose her enthusiasm. Now, shortly after getting that car, my mom became completely inactive. She would come if we had a talk, but other than that, she was not going to go to meetings. And so that's why things really changed for me at 18, because now it's up to me to get myself and my siblings to meetings, out in service, conventions, assemblies, the whole thing. As the elders told me many, many times, I may not be the head of the house, but I am the spiritual head. So that's a lot of responsibility to put on someone, especially at 18 years old. But it was enough to fully get me out of that rebellious stage and into a place where now I really was progressing as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, that following year, my stepbrother got disfellowshipped. And shortly after that, my sister was no longer an unbaptized publisher. And then it was just me, a spiritual orphan, as they called me. Now, being a spiritual orphan is very difficult because normally you have your family to push you and encourage you to go to meetings. Normally, I had to make up an excuse. I got a headache. Oh, I got stomach hurts, whatever, to not go to meetings. But now, there was no one pushing me to go. It was completely up to me. And when I did go, there was no family sitting there with me. I was by myself. Now, at meetings, you know, not such a big deal. But I tell you, at assemblies, and especially at conventions, it was very, very, very lonely. But I still went with it. So at this point, I am not looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I am definitely progressing. Now, after a while of doing this, the elders eventually took notice. During one of my days when I had security duty at the call, one of the elders came outside with me, and as we're walking around the Kingdom Hall doing security, he asked me, have I ever thought about becoming a ministerial servant? I said, yeah, that was one of my goals. He says, okay, he's going to talk to the elder body about it and get me recommended. Next thing I know, I'm talking to one of the other elders, and he's saying, we would like to make you a ministerial servant, but we need you to keep a minimum of 10 hours a month, at least. Makes sense? So from that point forward, every chance I got, I was out in service. Not only during the regular service hours, but I'm talking about getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, the day that most people want to sleep in, 5 o'clock in the morning, to go out in early morning service, to do bus stops. A lot of times I would put in auxiliary pioneer hours, even when I didn't sign up for auxiliary pioneering. And of course, because things are so much about numbers, so much about appearances, that got their attention. So this brings us to the fall of 2013. On this particular day, I did not want to go out in service. It's the fall in Seattle, which means it's cold and rainy. But as a Jehovah's Witness, I had the mindset that the more you did not want to go out in service, the more you did not want to do something which required extra effort, that Jehovah would see that extra effort and you would be extra blessed. And so since I delayed getting out of bed for so long, I could not make it to my own congregation. So I went to the Kingdom Hall that was actually closer to me, which was one of my friend's congregations. Now, this congregation had a girl in it that I was very, very interested in. It was one of those situations where you see somebody at a convention, right? And you're thinking, man, I wonder where she goes to. And then you see her again at the assembly. It's getting closer. And then just by chance, you go visit your friend's congregation one day, and there she is. You found what congregation she goes to. So there was one of those type of situations. And so that day I went out and served with them, not just for the morning session, but also for the afternoon. Extra effort, but extra blessings, right? So what happened? My friend decided to set us up on a little date. And so we go to see a movie. And while I'm at the movie, I get a call from one of my elders. And so this is the perfect Jehovah's Witness day. I mean, one of the highlights of being a Jehovah's Witness. I'm out here. I got to hang out with my friends all day. I now get to hang out with this girl I'm interested in. Now I'm getting a call from an elder while the circuit overseer is in town. I'm in good standing. I've been doing all the things I've been told to do. And he's asking me if I want to meet with him and the circuit overseer. And so I already know what that means. But before I get to that, let's just continue with how that day went. So we go to see the movie, and after the movie ends, I get a chance to just talk, myself and this girl I'm interested in. And this is where I see that dating as a witness is not going to be super easy. When I tried to talk to her, I could not have a human conversation with her. I was wanting someone who I could be real with. Throughout my entire time as a Jehovah's Witness, you had to put on this mask. You have to act, different. People ask you what music you like. You got to give a very generic answer because you don't want to say the truth because they'll judge you immediately. That was my life as a Jehovah's Witness. And up to a point, I accepted that. I was okay with that. Okay, that's just how I have to be. But I didn't want to have to be that way with someone that I was going to be married to. I didn't want that to be my whole life at home, where you're supposed to be the most yourself. And so, long story short, it was just a major turnoff. This girl was considered to be part of a family that was very, very lived and breathed Jehovah. Okay, extremely, extremely spiritual, as they say. It was like talking to a robot. Everything that she said was just like a pre-scripted what Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to say. But yeah, obviously that did not work, but that's okay. I mean, I am now becoming a ministerial servant. I mean, whoa. Even for someone like me who never really cared about titles, it was still a very, very big deal for me. So I have that meeting with the circuit overseer. He's asking me all sorts of questions. Of course, he asked the question about CSA. If I ever had any history with CSA, that was weird. I didn't understand what that was about. In hindsight, now I do. But, back then, I had no idea why they were asking that. But all went through well. And not only was I made a ministerial servant, out of my entire congregation, at that point in time, I was the youngest. And I was the only one in my congregation, out of all the young men, who got appointed as a ministerial servant without ever having regular pioneer. So at this point in time, I am, of course, fully progressing. And of course, I am not looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. The following year, 2014, was easily one of the highlight years as a Jehovah's Witness for me. I had so many friends. I had made friends with this one guy, and he was just that one of those people that just knows everybody. And so I was getting invited to all these gatherings. You can't say party, you got to say gatherings. I was invited to all those gatherings. I'm meeting all these new people. Of course, I'm a ministerial servant, so I'm enjoying serving in that aspect. And it's the international convention that year. When you step into that stadium and it's people from all these countries and all these areas, thousands of people. I mean, it's amazing. Even on this side of the fence, I can admit, pretty amazing. Now, on this side of the fence, I now know that you don't have to be in an organization like that to get that sense of unity. There's other places where that also exists, and it exists in a more pure way. But for me at that time as a Jehovah's Witness, that was just, breathtaking. And of course, as a ministerial servant, I was involved in a lot of the setup and all the other activities that were going around the international convention. So it made me even more just into this organization. So really, I am not looking to leave. I am progressing forward. Now, the following year, 2015, this is the year when I got my first job at a Jehovah's Witness-owned company. Now, I worked for 2 Jehovah's Witness-owned companies during my time as a witness. This was the first one. I won't say the name of the company, but what I will say is that it really shattered my perception of how Jehovah's Witnesses should be. I knew that Jehovah's Witnesses often acted one way outside the Kingdom Hall and acted another way, when they're in. I knew that, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't perfect, but it still really surprised me working for a Jehovah's Witness-owned company and seeing the way that they treated each other. In this company, in Washington State, we have labor laws for hourly workers that anytime you go over 5 hours, you are entitled to a lunch break. This company, they had us working 10, 11-hour days. Physical job. We were delivering, pretty heavy goods to offices around the Seattle area. And they told us that we needed to sign a statement saying that we voluntarily were giving up our right to a lunch break because we were so overloaded. The entire disorganization of this company, again, it shattered my belief about how Jehovah's Witnesses were supposed to be, especially because the managers of this company were ministerial servants and elders. And not just any ministerial servants and elders. These are people that when you go to the convention, you would see them doing duties at the convention. These are pretty high up people. And yet they were treating their fellow witnesses just horribly. Of course, knowing that as witnesses, you're not supposed to sue another witness. And so they were just getting away with it. Everybody just stayed quiet. It was crazy. It was so crazy that eventually it reached a tipping point, in particular because of the people that worked at the company who weren't witnesses, where they eventually had to hire a HR person to come in and just clean up their mess. And when this lady came in, she could not believe what was going on there, how people were being treated, how things were set up, just the overall disorganization of that company. And yet, this is a Jehovah's Witness-owned company. The people who view themselves as being of a higher standard, but this is how their company was run. The sad thing was that after I left, the company started to go downhill. And as they needed to make budget cuts, there was a neighboring congregation in my area where the majority of the pioneers in that congregation worked for this company just because the hours worked so well with, getting their service time in. When this company started to lose their money, started to go downhill, they laid off all of the Jehovah's Witness workers, save for a couple. This is a Jehovah's Witness-owned company owned by people who, at the time, were ministerial servants and elders. But out of everybody at their company, they chose to let go of the people who Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to support the most, the pioneers. Again, completely shattered my perception of how Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to be and how they're supposed to treat each other. And yet, I was still progressing forward. I still did not want to leave the organization. Now, the following year, 2016, was one of the best years for me as a Jehovah's Witness, other than 2014. At the beginning of 2016, I got my second job working for a Jehovah's Witness-owned company. Got out of that crazy first company. The second company was actually in my field that I went to school for, architectural design. This was a home builder company. Majority of the people there were Jehovah's Witnesses, including the owner at that time. And this company was actually a lot better organized, really a lot better organized. There's actually not too much I could complain about them other than the fact that, their pay wasn't really what it should be. Now, there was definitely areas where you could see the witness influence. There was things that came up that were, would just be inappropriate in any other office environment. But overall, I was very happy there, and it was in my work field. Now, shortly after working there, I got my second car, dream car, Infiniti G37. I got the coupe version because, again, I'm a practical witness. At that time, I was about 24. I was still single. I did not have kids. I was not pioneering. Why do I need a 4-door service car? I'm going to get myself something fun. And at this time, I made a bunch of new friends, thanks to that other friend that just knows everybody. If Wally's watching this, you know him. His name starts with the R, Asian guy, knows everybody, okay? Drives a sports car, works in construction. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. And so at this point, as a Jehovah's Witness, I was extremely content, extremely comfortable. I mean, truly everything felt like it was going great. I am truly not looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. I am progressing forward. I mean, I really cannot stress enough that even though the very next year I woke up, but in 2016, that was when I was at my deepest, at my happiest as a Jehovah's Witness. At the end of 2016, on Christmas Day, I was scheduled to give my very first public talk. I mean, again, progressing forward, not looking to leave. But there was one thing missing from my life. Again, I had my car I wanted, I had the job I wanted, I had all these friends. And when you reach that age, I mean, out here in the regular world, 24, 25, they're still getting things figured out. They're not thinking about marriage. But in the Jehovah's Witnesses, you turn 21, people are starting to get married, right? And so after seeing some of my friends get married off, now it's on my mind. And again, I had mentioned that issue with that previous girl. And there had been other instances like that with other people. And in all of those instances, I saw that I was not going to be able to be myself. You got to be so guarded. There was no freedom of expression. There was no freedom to truly be myself without the fear of being judged. Thinking longer term, I'm thinking, man, how do I even listen to the music that I like? How do I play the games I like? Now, one of the big issues with a lot of the sisters that I was being introduced to was that in the spectrum of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have the people that are on the very edge who are really, really into it. They live and breathe Jehovah, would not even dream of waking up in the morning and not reading the daily text first thing when they wake up. Then on the other side, you have the people who are on the fence. They're not really into it. They're not taking it seriously. They're living a double life. I was in the middle, but closer to the side of being more spiritual. And a lot of the sisters that I was getting introduced to were on the extreme spiritual side. So this was what was fueling that feeling for me that I could not meet someone who I could truly be myself with. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that I didn't run into it. And thank goodness I didn't. Otherwise, had I found someone, I would still for sure be a Jehovah's Witness today. But here's what happened instead. At my local grocery store, there's a cute girl that works there at that time. And being a good Jehovah's Witness, I'm not really interested. But it's just someone that you see in passing. You take a second glance or two, It's that sort of thing. Other than that, I'm being a good Jehovah's Witness. I'm not looking to get unevenly yoked or anything like that. Because again, I am progressing. I got my first public talk at the end of that year. I'm not going to mess that up. But then things get a little bit deeper because my sister also works at that store. And just through our conversations in passing, I kind of, oh man, so-and-so is pretty cute, right? And my sister takes note of that, and she starts telling me about how cool she is. A little more time goes by. Of course, my whole family shops at that store. So my mom ends up getting closer to this person. And she starts talking about, oh, she's pretty nice, And through their conversations, it comes out that this girl's also single. But again, this is a passing interest. I cannot stress that enough because I know there's witnesses out there who will watch this and say, oh, he became unevenly yoked. Or, oh, he got, pulled out by some Jezebel, something like that. No, that's not the case at all. At all. Don't kid yourself. Don't tell yourself lies to make your story feel more comfortable to you. That's not what happened at all. And so eventually, December 25th, 2016 rolls around, Christmas Day. I go to the meeting, and right after the prayer ends, the meeting conductor calls me to stage to do my very first talk. This is a symposium style talk, so I'm just doing the first 15 minutes. And then a friend of mine did the latter 15 minutes. But easily the highlight of my life as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm only looking to go up from there. Now, I am not the best speaker in the world. But one thing I was good at was writing. And so I could write my talks very, very well. I used a lot of illustrations. I used physical objects that I would bring up. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And the congregation enjoyed it. I mean, I was the type of person that the older sisters would say, one day you are going to become a circuit overseer. And even though I didn't have that goal in mind, I knew that, hey, at some point down the line, if I was asked to do that, I would absolutely do it. Obviously, I am not looking to leave. I am fully progressing forward. And so that brings us to early 2017, just before I woke up. A lot of people say that those that leave the Jehovah's Witnesses were spiritually weak. They were living a double life. They just got disfellowshipped and just decided not to come back. No. A month before waking up, I'm at the peak of my Jehovah's Witness career. I am loving every second of it. Now, happiness is a scale. And where I thought I was very happy, I would say that I wasn't actually happy. It's kind of like speed, right? I thought that eclipse was pretty fast until I got my infinity. Then I saw that wasn't fast. And I thought my infinity was fast until one day I test drove a Tesla Performance, and that's fast. Yeah, you think 5.2 seconds 0 to 60 is fast until you experience 2.9. So same thing with happiness. I thought that I was happy at that point, but I hadn't experienced true happiness as I have on the outside. But at that point, I thought I was happy. I'm not looking to leave. Now, I mentioned that this girl at the store, my sister already says that she's cool. My mom says she's cool. Now we know she's single. And so one day came, I got off work early. I go to just do some shopping. And I get a chance to talk to this girl. And I'm not even looking to talk to her. Again, this was just a passing crush. Store's not busy. And I get a chance to actually talk to her. And she is very, very cool. And more than that, though, I feel like I can be myself. And that was just the biggest thing for me at that time. And it was enough to just boost my interest just a little bit. Again, it's still a passing crush, but it boosts my interest just enough to the point where I'm thinking, if I get a chance to talk to her again, I'm not looking for it, but if opportunity comes up, I'm going to mention that I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and I'm going to try to get her into it. That was my goal, okay? My goal is to get her into this organization so that then we can make something happen. Now, interesting thing with actually the very same person who set up that date at the movie theater all those years ago, There was a deal with one of our friends who was a pioneer at the time, and he was dating someone who was still a study. And it was this huge thing, right? Everybody got into his business and stuff. Big old mess. And that friend said to me that, elders really frown upon people who get married right after somebody gets baptized, because that means that you were dating somebody who was not baptized. Basically dating someone who's not really a Jehovah's Witness. And for some reason, that always stuck with me. And it really stuck with me in this situation because, again, my intention is I'm getting this girl to be a Jehovah's Witness. And so now I'm thinking, well, hey, if this chance comes up and I get a chance to talk to her again, and if she is interested in studying, well, then what? Am I going to get in trouble for being interested in someone who's just a study? Do I have to wait till she gets baptized before we actually start something? I did not know. I really didn't know. And as a ministerial servant, I really needed to know. I didn't want to, I worked so hard to get to that point. I wasn't going to ruin it. And so I knew that I could not ask my elders that question. I mean, could you imagine you're a ministerial servant? You're going to ask your elders, hey, what is the rule on ministerial servants dating someone who is not baptized? That's going to put a red flag on you, right? And so what I did instead was I went to Google. And if you know my story, you know how things went. I went to Google and I figured that there was somebody else out there. There had to be somebody else out there who was in a similar position and that there would be an answer out there. I don't know why I looked it up on Google, but that's what I did. And thank goodness I did, because what happened was I found my answer. And by the way, the answer is that you would have to step down if you did that. And you would be marked as well. But not only did I find the answer, I found that answer on the EXJW Reddit page. And at that time, those letters EXJW, that didn't ring a bell. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was that I found my answer and that these people on this website seemed to be in the know about the organization. So I clicked on the header. That takes you to the main page of the EXJW Reddit page. And there I realized that this was an apostate group. Now, as soon as I realized that, even as a black person, I probably turned white as a ghost in that moment. Now, of course, I wanted to quickly close that page, but before I could close it, I had already seen some stuff. And what I saw went against what I was told apostates were. What I saw were people who were really hurting because of the Jehovah's Witnesses, because of their policies. What I saw were people who were disfellowshipped, who were being shunned and going through the realistic effects of being shunned. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, you see that as loving discipline. But to see it from the other side, the real effects of how it impacts that person, that was really eye-opening for me. I saw the PMOs. That was another thing that was very, very eye-opening for me, that there was people who were stuck in the Jehovah's Witnesses, who wanted to leave but couldn't. And of course, the ARC was going on, Australian Royal Commission at that time. And so I saw all the information coming out about the CSA cases, the millions of dollars that the Jehovah's Witnesses have spent settling some of these cases outside of court. And so that gave me more fuel to keep looking. And eventually I found myself on JWFacts.com, and that really took down the house of cards. Even though I had woken up, at that point in time, I was not looking to leave. My feeling at that point was that Jehovah was going to fix this. If this was really his organization, he would fix it. Now, as time went on, month after month, you keep looking at things, you keep researching things, and more I got to the point where I realized these guys are no good. And so that went on for months. And all the while, I'm still serving as a ministerial servant, but I am starting to formulate this plan at that point in time, which was to not necessarily leave the witnesses, but to take a giant step back, to step down from being a ministerial servant, and to basically put myself in a position where I can just sit back and watch and see what happens and see if Jehovah fixes this thing. And then if I see that things are progressing, then I'm going to jump headfirst back into it, become a ministerial servant, become an elder, all that good stuff. That was my plan. August 22nd, 2017, That was my 26th birthday. The first birthday in all those years as a witness that I didn't celebrate it, but I recognized it. I was taking a cruise for a vacation, and while I was on that cruise, I was both working on my second public talk, this time the full 30 minutes, while simultaneously reading Crisis of Conscience. And I tell you, that book really changed things for me. That's when I really saw that not only were the Jehovah's Witnesses in modern day doing things that were really hurting people, but this was going back to the beginning of the organization. And when you read it from the perspective of someone who was a governing body member, helping to make these rules, trying to fight against some of the things that they wanted to do, I mean, it really shows a whole different perspective of how this organization is run. From the blood issue to being a dictator about what married couples are allowed to do in their bedroom, to who should be shunned and who shouldn't. I mean, it was all about control. And just like today, anytime they changed the rules, there was no compassion and no word, no sorry, no apology for all the people that were affected by the old set of rules. There were people who had died because of old rules dealing with blood. There were people who had gotten divorced due to old rules dealing with what married couples are allowed to do. I mean, where's the apology for that stuff? Where's the acknowledgement that, you know what, we had it wrong? It's not there. From the same people that push being humble, there is no humility. And so at this point in time, I am in neutral, okay? I'm not pushing forward, but I'm also not pulling back. I'm in neutral. I'm still serving as a ministerial servant. I had that mindset that I'm just going to do my last talk. I'm going to step down, switch to a different congregation where I can just watch things from the background. That was my whole plan. So the day comes, I do my second talk, goes fantastic. The elders are talking to me saying, are you sure you want to switch congregations? You know, we can work with you more. We can get you to the point where you are doing talks in other congregations. We can keep advancing you. Nope, I'm just going to switch and just watch from the background. And so for those first few weeks at that new congregation, I was going to every single meeting, actually. I wasn't really fading. It wasn't until...
Now, there's something that the apostates are talking about and trying to put forward. The media has picked it up. Others have also picked it up. And that is our scriptural position of having two witnesses a requirement for judicial action if there's no confession. We will never change our scriptural position on that subject. Jehovah has given us the ability to reason things out, to think it through. So let's do our part and not allow our faith to be quickly shaken.
And for me, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. At that point, I knew, number one, they're going to gaslight their members. They're lying to their members, saying that these are just lies, that nothing's going on. And they're not going to change. And that's when I knew I couldn't have anything to do with them. And so it was at that point in time, at that point, not before, after being awake for, over 6 months, doing all this research, reading Crisis of Conscience, it took that announcement to get me to the point where at that point, I did want to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was pulling back. That's when I started to fade, and that's where I got to a month later in December, going to my very last meeting and never stepping into a Kingdom Hall ever again. So truly, you can see throughout my entire story, right up to the very end, even after I was awake, I was not looking to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was continuing to progress forward. I was very deep in. Not only was all my friends involved in this organization, my job was involved in the organization. My family had fallen out, but my hope was always that they would come back in. And that's why I stayed so strong, being again a spiritual orphan. So before we wrap this thing up, let's just go through the main ingredients here. What would cause a faithful ministerial servant who is continuing to progress in this organization to wake up and leave? So the first ingredient is obviously the abuse cases. If you've been on my channel long enough, you know that had a big impact on me waking up. And there's a few factors to this. The first being that these abuse cases show that the Jehovah's Witnesses care more about protecting their reputation than they do about protecting the children within their organization. Policies like the two-witness rule let abusers run free. Not reporting known abusers to the authorities lets abusers run free. They are exposing both children within their organization as well as children outside the organization to known abusers.
And as an organization, in your experience, you don't seek to protect or take care of children who are outside of the congregation?
That's a broad statement.
Well, I can limit it.
Yeah, limit it.
In
please.
your decision on whether or not to disfellowship someone, you don't take consideration of children outside of the congregation.
Do take consideration of them, but what ability have we got to protect every child in Australia?
Well, what you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
For that, there is no excuse. The second factor of this is it shows a complete lack of empathy. Some of these abuse victims were forced to face their abuser. Some were told to forgive their abuser and trust that Jehovah would sort things out. Some were disfellowshipped when they went to the police on their own. And of course, on this side of the fence, anybody who speaks out against this issue, that spreads awareness about this issue, is called an apostate and is silenced. That's the worst offense. So they do all these measures to protect themselves, protect their own reputation. But there's nothing for the child that has been harmed and traumatized. And the third factor is just the straight up gaslighting and lying that goes along with this issue. Case in point, during the ARC, this issue is big enough that this government organization had to investigate the Jehovah's Witnesses. They found thousands of cases that were not reported to the police. It was such a big issue that Jeffrey Jackson from the governing body, you know this, had to come on stand under oath and explain these issues. So it was a big enough issue that they had this big investigation, and that's just in Australia. There was also the thing in Montana where they had to pay thousands of dollars per day that they didn't turn over their database of known abusers. There's many other multi-million-dollar cases where they had to settle out. So you have all this stuff going on while simultaneously on the inside to their members, they're saying none of this stuff is happening. It's all apostate lies. It's attacks from Satan's government. You can't have it both ways. You can't have where a governing body member has to come on stand. It's that serious of an issue, but then at the same time say that there is no issue, that it's apostate lies. They are gaslighting their members. They are lying to their members about an issue that, how many Jehovah's Witnesses do you know that have young children? How many times have you gone to a convention or assembly and you see young children running around? And of course they would, because when you're a witness, you think that you are amongst, top tier people, top tier, honest, good people. You wouldn't think for a second that your child may be unsafe in that environment. And yet these issues are happening right under their nose. Now, the second ingredient to waking up is the information control. Your average Jehovah's Witness, not only do they have no idea about these abuse cases, they have no idea about the Watchtower's properties, they have no idea about the investments, they have no idea about their involvement with the United Nations, they have no idea about the Elders Manual. And that's a good segue into the next factor of information control, which is that it keeps the Jehovah's Witnesses in a state of ignorance. If you go to your average Jehovah's Witness and tell them about the Elders Manual, not only do they think that that doesn't exist, they think that's an apostate lie. That's ignorance in itself right there. And they are more than happy to let the average Jehovah's Witness continue thinking that that book doesn't exist. And as I've mentioned before, when it comes to that elders book, out here in the real world, all the books of the law, at least in the free countries, that's public information. So that you as a citizen can go out there if you want to and look at these law books and make sure that these authority figures are treating you within your rights. You don't have that right. You don't have that freedom as a Jehovah's Witness. Now, the third ingredient is seeing the mental conditioning. This is not something that you can see when you're under the influence of it. But once you wake up, it's right in your face. And there's a lot of factors to this one too. The first being that their use of fear, guilt, shame, obligation, That all forces you to make decisions that bypass your natural judgments. Another factor is that Jehovah's Witnesses believe what they are told to believe. Now that seems obvious from the outside looking in, but on the inside, they have a very nice setup to give you the illusion that you are doing real studying and that you are coming to these conclusions on your own. When in reality, you're studying within a box. These are all tools for indoctrination. Now, all of those things are exterior. So now we got to ask, well, what's going on the inside? How do these things impact me personally? The abuse cases put me in a position where my own morals, my own feelings of what a good person should do, my own conscience went against the policy and the overall attitude of the Watchtower. So here the Watchtower is saying that this is a non-issue. These are apostate lies. These are just baseless attacks. And yet the reality is these things are really happening. It's a worldwide issue. And sure, you could say that the Watchtower is not making people commit these horrible acts. Anywhere you go, you're going to have some bad apples. The real issue is that the Watchtower's policies enable these things to continue happening. The issue is that they have known abusers that they don't report to the police. The issue, and we can see this with a lot of these high-control religious groups, they are so wrapped up in their own self-righteousness that they can't dare to see where they themselves are gone wrong, where they themselves are doing the damage. The information control showed me how small my thinking was. You should not be afraid of looking up critical information or opposing views on anything that you believe in. That's ridiculous. So for example, a lot of my friends and family know I'm a big fan of Apple. I think they make great products. They have a good ecosystem. They got that tie between the hardware and the software, so things just work. You don't have to sit there and fight with your phone. I like using it. However, no matter how much of an Apple fan I can be, I am not ignorant to the fact that this phone was most likely made in factory conditions that are basically modern day slavery. I am not ignorant to that fact at all. But what these groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses want you to do is ignore anything that speaks negatively about their organization, because they believe that you can't come to your own conclusions, or they know that if you did come to your own conclusions, that conclusion would be that they're in the wrong. Now, lastly, we have the mental conditioning. That one actually hit me pretty hard. It showed me how much I had kept myself down, how much I had not accepted myself or truly loved myself because of the way that they taught me to think. In my pursuit of having this perfect relationship with Jehovah, I had a horrible relationship with myself. And I know for sure that there's some religious people out there who will hear that and say, oh, that's just fine. You should prioritize your relationship with God above anything else. I disagree. You cannot have anything truly for anybody else or anything else that you don't have for yourself. How could I ever begin to love Jehovah when I didn't have love for myself? Now, the more I understood what healthy self-love is, the more I understood that these words love, forgiveness, mercy, peace, all of these words have a much deeper meaning than these distorted definitions that groups like the Watchtower give them. Now, last but not least, one of the deepest feelings, one of the deepest hurdles that I had to overcome during this time of waking up was the realization that just being part of a religious organization does not make you a good person. Just doing the things that they tell you to do does not make you a good person or more worthy. I had realized how selfish I was actually, under the guise of being a good Jehovah's Witness. And that right there, that's where a lot of people can get stuck. Because all of us, especially the longer you were in and the higher up you went, all of us had to do things both to ourselves and to others, all for the fact of being a good Jehovah's Witness. Giving up on friendships, giving up on career dreams, staying in a marriage that is not fulfilling, sitting in on a judicial committee where you help to disfellowship somebody. The list goes on, but in many, many ways, again, we've all done things both to ourselves and to other people, all for the sake of being a good Jehovah's Witness. And this is where you really have to have some self-forgiveness, which is something that Jehovah's Witnesses were never taught to do. We were always taught to be so self-critical. But when it comes to this, you really got to be able to forgive yourself. Again, especially if you were an elder and you disfellowship people, you got to be able to forgive yourself. And part of the reason it's so hard, beyond just the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses taught us to be so self-critical, another factor of it is that, you can come to accept the fact that the Watchtower is not perfect, that they got some issues. You can come to accept the reality of the abuse cases, the reality of the mental conditioning, the reality of the information control, how you've been kept in a box, how you've been misled. You can come to accept, as hard as it can be, the reality of those things. But when it comes to all the things that we did, all the ways that we held ourselves back, all the actions that we did over all these years, all for the sake of being a good Jehovah's Witness, those things are harder to accept. It couldn't have been for nothing. It couldn't have been for nothing. That's the one thing that kept going through my head as I was going through this waking up experience. It couldn't have been for nothing. That right there is what keeps people in. Especially, again, the higher you go, the longer you've been in, the more things you've had to do to be a good Jehovah's Witness. The more sacrifices that you've had to make to be a good Jehovah's Witness. Can't have been all for nothing. So here's what I would say to you. No matter what position that you were in, no matter what you had to do, no matter how you held yourself back, no matter how you hurt others, all for the sake of being a good Jehovah's Witness, just remember, that wasn't you. I'm going to take my hat off, show some respect here. That was not you. Please listen to me. That wasn't you. So don't let those things keep you in this organization. Please. It wasn't you. If you put a gun to somebody's head, you'd be surprised at some of the things that they would do that they wouldn't normally do. It's called acting under duress. And that's how we were as Jehovah's Witnesses. We made decisions and we acted under duress. They didn't put a gun to our head, they put Jehovah to our head. And by the time we reached baptism, we held that to our head ourselves. We lived under so much fear, and it became so normalized we didn't even realize we were scared. It was just normal. So please do not hold yourself back because of all the things that you had to give up, all the sacrifices that you've made, all for the sake of being a good Jehovah's Witness. That wasn't you. And in the end, you can be so much more than everything that you've lost. You have the right, if you want to, if you can step into your own power, to gain far more than you've ever lost. In addition to myself, I also know a handful of people that I grew up with that were witnesses, strong in it, that also left. You got Wally, very, very deep in it. His family is still considered very strong spiritual family in this area. He's out. There was another girl, I really want her to tell her story at some point, but she's one of those people who's just like, I didn't even want to think about it, and that's okay. Not everybody's going to tell their story. That's okay. But this person in my congregation, around my age, and she was also a spiritual orphan, coming by herself, I believe since she was like 17, coming by herself. She was a pioneer, regular pioneer. She was doing her usual Watchtower study for the meeting that day. And in that study, they were talking about encouraging women who were in abusive relationships to stay strong and be a good Christian woman and to win over their husband. And that itself opened up her eyes. That's all it took for her. Now she's out. Another guy, Patrick, you've seen him on my channel before. When I first started this channel, he was like the first interview that I did. Okay, he was an elder. You can go back and listen to his interview. At some point, I gotta have him back on here so he can tell about all the things that he's done since leaving. But yeah, he was very deep in it. He was someone that I knew from another friend. And when we would go out and do our group trips together, he was someone who was considered to be very spiritual. He's out. There was another young brother from my congregation. Actually, another spiritual orphan. Actually, he was coming by himself too. He became a ministerial servant. He switched to another congregation shortly after. A little bit after that, we heard he got disfellowshipped, and a little bit after that, we heard he's never coming back. He's out. And none of these people were looking to leave. None of these people were living a double life. I mean, we all have our struggles, but none of them were living a double life. But they are out. So if you're watching this video, whether you've been out for a while or you're just now coming out, and you got people that you really, really care about who are in this organization, stuck in, please do not give up hope. You have no idea what it will be that will cause somebody to wake up. The vast majority of people that I know who are awake, including the people that I just mentioned, these are all people that if you go back 10 years, no one would bet that they would wake up. I wouldn't bet that I would wake up. No way. Out of all the young people in my congregation, there was probably a good 3 or 4 of them that would be safer bets on people who would leave. No, it was the people that you wouldn't think would leave who are now out. And we see the Watchtower continuing to do things that are ruffling the feathers of some people. I mean, the beard rule on itself, all these years where beards were a major issue, and the way they announced it, the way that they changed that rule was like it just never mattered. That kind of stuff, those kind of moves, that in itself can wake people up. So if the Watchtower keeps moving the way that they've been moving, you can almost bet that they're going to wake up people on their own. If these cases keep coming out, people keep coming forward and telling their true story, you can bet people are going to be woken up. And on our side, if we keep spreading awareness the way that we are, getting the real truth out there, no matter who it reaches, you don't know how these messages can reach somebody. If you ask me, everybody is capable of waking up. Everybody. You don't know what it's going to be for certain people. I mean, if you ask me what woke me up, a lot of times I'll say the ARC, but that's not necessarily the full truth. There was all these things working together that led me to waking up. And so sometimes it is things that you may not even know about going on in the person, going on in their life, that when combined with something else, it's done. So please don't give up hope. Take it easy on yourselves, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.